Story 1. Dang, I have an eye story too. So one day there was a sudden windstorm while I was in an open parking lot on the outskirts of a city. A leaf flew right into my eye and I immediately started to hurt. I somehow drove home and my eye was constantly just hurting. I washed it a few times. Yeah, that didn't work. So I start to feel movement inside my eyes but could not see anything in the mirror. I freak out and start gently poking around in my eyes with my index finger. A tiny little dot came out and moved a little on the tip of my finger and I ran to my mom. I showed her and she could not see anything. To be honest, it was so freaking tiny and barely moved. It hurt for an hour and I had found 2 more tiny moving freaks from my eye. I was convinced I wasn't just, quote, seeing things. Then finally, my mom took me to an eye surgeon. Went in as an emergency and the doctor examined and rushed me to the OR, saying I had a living microorganisms inside my eye. Took about 20 minutes and they removed all 14 of them. Alive! Got a patch like a pirate that I had to wear for a few days, and doctor said he's never seen anything like that in his 25 years of experience. Said I was 1 in a million type case, and if I've taken a day to come in, chances were high that I would have been blind. Story 2. I was so freakishly allergic to ant and bee venom as a child that a single sting from a single little common black ant put me into an anaphylactic shock. When my allergist was preparing to start immunotherapy for me, he found that the in-office lab equipment wasn't sensitive enough to measure the actual small amount of allergen, which would start my titration. So he had to send a sample of my blood to Johns Hopkins so that their lab could determine how much to give me. I did immunotherapy for several years to reach an immune response level, at which it would be safer for me to basically exist in a non-frozen climate. Good news. I'm good now. I've had a few run-ins with ants and wasps since my immunotherapy, and my body did not freak out and shut down. And research indicates that it hasn't done that after this long. I'm probably safe for, I don't know, maybe ever. I don't have an EpiPen, and I'm not overly afraid of ants or bees. Story number 3. Not sure about the odds of this one, but I survived a non-survivable plane crash. I was on an old PO2, famous for being very safe and uncrashable, on a tour of the desert in western China when I was 7. My father's friend who hosted me and piloted the plane did not survive, but somehow I got out with just a concussion, and apparently passed out for almost a day in the middle of the desert in the wreckage of the crash, 50 kilometers from town, on the edge of the desert. The people who found me were some tree planters. They plant greens in the desert to protect towns from sandstorms. A lot of people live in these desert towns in China and they do this. And they found me on their way to picking up a shipment. The only reason they looked was because they were making a bet on how fast the egg would cook in the sand, and they just went off the road to test it. I guess you could say that is pretty much 1 in a million. Story 4. I was actually homeless for 4 years, between the ages of 19 to 23. As silly as it sounds, I used to earn some extra money at the time by helping around in a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. It was my biggest hobby when I was younger and was something I felt confident about. I also did not have a passport or a bank account, so I couldn't get a normal job. Anyways, so at the time I was stuck, not earning enough money, without a passport, bank account, or a real job. In the United Kingdom, you're not going to get hired by like 99% of companies if you don't have a passport to prove that you have a right to work. So, one day I get a phone call from a studio asking if I played Yu-Gi-Oh! And would consider myself a geek. Also, if I wanted to be in a TV show. They said they would send me to another country as part of it, and well, being homeless, the biggest problem is being bored, so naturally I said yes, but told them I don't have a passport. They say, "No problem, we'll get you one straight away and pay for it ourselves." I end up on a show called Geeks that you can still watch on Channel 4OD. Because I got this passport, I was finally able to get a job, a bank account, and finally a house. Now I'm looking after my 10-month-old daughter who's playing while I type this. So I guess you could say, Yu-Gi-Oh! Saved me from being homeless. I might be an anime character. Story number 5. I own a Lego minifigure called Mr. Gold. See, this particular minifigure was celebrated with the 10th series of the Lego figure line. They all sort of like grab bags. You can feel for them, but you don't know what minifigure you're really going to get. So because they were celebrating, they thought it was a good idea to only make 5,000 of these. Anyways, when I was younger, and even now, I was really good at knowing which figures they are simply by looking at the figure pieces and filling out those pieces. I really liked the minifigures because I thought they were really cool and unique, so I really wanted Mr. Gold. And me and my mom hunted for it for a long time, but after a while I gave up. Then, one day, I was at the Lego store and felt the distinct diamond piece and absolutely freaked. Finding this figure was downright fantasy. I'm 18 years old now and still want to relive the 12-year-old me, the pure joy I felt as I ripped open that packaging. Story number 6. When I was a teenager, I had just started working at the local Sears Auto Center Express Lube shop. And on a day 1, I did a quick little orientation and I did my first oil change. The manager walked away when he felt I was good to go and the oil change went well. Fast forward a few days. Later, my manager asked me to come into his office and he explained that the oil filter I used had one huge flaw. I didn't know what that was, and it turned out the filter was pressed on backwards into the filter, and it would not allow oil to flow in and out, and it damaged the motor. They had to purchase a new motor for the person, and I still kept my job. He said it was a 1 in a million chance that would have happened, and it did not even matter. It happened on my first oil change. Story 7, how I met my wife. Well, I'm from the Netherlands and she's from the United States, but we met in Israel. It was my first weekend in Israel and decided to go on a pub crawl to meet some people and have fun. As I'm buying the ticket, my now wife walks up to the counter to also buy a ticket. The girl working there introduces us and we hit it off the first night, but I'm leaving in 2 days to stay with friends of friends in the middle of the desert for 90 days. 2 days after I leave, I lose my phone. Don't have any idea or any way to get back in touch with her, and I had little money and could stay/work with people in the desert. But I just kept thinking about her, so after a week, I say I'm leaving, and I take the next bus. It goes 3 times a week at 5 a.m., and then a train to Tel Aviv, and I have no idea how to find her, where she's staying, and I have very little money. So, I email a couple hostels to find a work/stay agreement. Those jobs are very popular and usually planned months in advance, so I get an email back when I arrive in Tel Aviv. I come in for an interview because they have a spot, and this is already ridiculously lucky. Right after the interview and dropping off my belongings, I went back to the first hotel to see if they would give me information, and they would not give me anything. Now I'm at a loss. Tel Aviv is a city more than 500,000 people. I don't know anyone and have little more than the clothes on my back. Kinda defeated, I just start wandering around exploring the city. After a couple hours, I get hungry. I decide to treat myself to a restaurant. I'm well aware about the tourist stuff and I stay out of the tourist area and find a place that's almost empty and really cheap. So, I sit down. I order a drink and something to eat. As I get my food, I see my now wife walking past the restaurant and she sees me and I see her. I'm literally dumbstruck and just find a grin and wave. Remember how I lost my phone? She didn't know that and just thought I ignored her. She waves and keeps walking, and I throw like 200 shekels, which was way too much money, at the table, and I sprint after her and explain, and well, the rest is history. Story number 8. I lived in Florida for the first 18 years of my life and spent most of my free time outdoors. Fishing, camping, what have you. The summer before my junior year of high school, I found myself out hiking nearby my home with a buddy. We were stomping around in some clay deposits inside a little ravine. Even minimal geographic relief is dramatic in a place as flat as the Gulf Coast. When it starts to Florida rain. For those of you who don't know what that means or who can't relate, imagine a torrential downpour that just comes on suddenly. Our minds immediately jump to the exciting possibility of a flash flood raging through the crevices that we were exploring. In an effort to make our day more exciting and not take any chances, we began to climb vertically out of the canyon versus take the lengthy path to the horizon. We get to the top, put our feet on the ground, and, well, pulled our feet up. As I stood up, I felt the ground underneath me squirm. I had stepped on a snake. I screamed and kicked that snake that was latched onto my foot off me by reflexes. As an Eagle Scout, I immediately recognized the red and yellow pattern as the snake slithered away and knew it was a coral snake. We rushed home and drove to the hospital as we seen, and the doctor informed my parents that the nearest antivenom was 3-hour helicopter ride away. The first symptom, lung failure, it would occur after 2 hours. My parents called my friends and family, and we all spent time together without me knowing my fate. My friends and family arrived and subsequently left together. My parents turned off the lights and we prayed. Around 2 hours after being bitten, a nurse came into our dark room with a gurney to collect my dead body. I asked the nurse, "Has there been any developments?" To her surprise, the doctors came in shocked I was alive and told me, "Hey buddy, it was a dry bite, no venom, and that I should remain whatever religion I practiced, because I am damn lucky." Story 9. When I was 14 years old, I woke up one day with heavy stomach cramps. We called the hospital and they told us that I probably have a stomach flu and should go to the doctor the next morning. After one of the worst nights ever, vomiting and sleeping next to the toilet, we went to the doctor. I had a fever of 40 Celsius and was aching a lot. The doctor told me I had to go to the ER and have it checked out because she thought my appendix was inflamed and causing the pain. So, we went to the ER and I stayed at the hospital for about 2 weeks. But they couldn't find anything. They treated me with a broad range of antibiotics, and after 2 weeks I was feeling a bit better, and they told me to go home and recover from there. The night I got back from the hospital, I went to bed and started absolutely hallucinating that I lived in a retirement home, and that pirates, were coming to steal my booty. So I was flailing around trying to fend off pirates when my mother came in and asked what all the fuss was about. I told her what was going on, and she looked at me like I summoned a devil. She took my temperature and instantly took me to the emergency room. I had a 41°C fever. When we went back to the hospital, I get treated immediately for inflammation, and they did a wide range of testing again. They saw that something in my body was inflamed, but they couldn't find it, so I stayed in the hospital for about 2 more weeks when they finally found what was going on. My appendix was inflamed and burst the night I was having those hallucinations, but all the scans, well, they couldn't see my appendix. The doctor told me that if I came in 2 days later, I would have died because of the pus flowing in my body. Apparently, there's literally a 1% chance of all the appendix cases that the appendix is so stretched out that they couldn't see it on the scans, or that the area was so inflamed they didn't even see it. So, after staying on antibiotics for about 2 more weeks, they finally removed my appendix and all the pain was gone. I stayed at the hospital for over 4 weeks just because my appendix and my bad luck, well, was being that 1%. Story 10. We live in Jacksonville, Florida, and she rarely gets sick and has mild insomnia. Around Wednesday, she has a low fever and complains of aches and sweats at night and trouble sleeping. But if she was still feeling bad Sunday, we would go straight to the clinic, no questions asked. Saturday night, she could not sleep, so we made an appointment for Sunday afternoon. On our way there, sure enough, she's feeling better. Doctor checks her out and she's feeling fine now. No fever. He says she probably had meningitis but is recovering, and I'm due to go on a business trip to California the next day, which is Monday, and asked him if he thinks it's fine to go. He says, yeah, no problem. That evening, wife is eating and laughing. All's good. Monday morning, I leave early. That afternoon, my neighbor calls and lets me know my wife was wandering in the street in a delirium state. My wife didn't know where she was, and so the neighbor drove her to the ER. I book a flight home the next day. So, the hospital checks her out. She has a fever. Her blood cell count is in the basement, and she's completely out of it mentally. They're not sure what's wrong, and a bunch of specialists start descending on her. I have to fill out a bunch of paperwork on her medical history. There we've been, etc., places we just got back from, all that good stuff. They think maybe it's some weird autoimmune disorder. Not good. She gets a bunch of transfusions and puts on a cocktail of medication while they try to figure it out. Third day in the hospital, the infectious disease guy comes in. Blood parasite. Maybe tick-borne, and she'd been to the Midwest recently. Could have caught it if she went walking in the woods or a park. Next day, he comes in, figured out the parasite, and says, quote, "Why didn't you tell me she left the country?" Huh? She hasn't. Well, she has malaria. Malaria? I thought you couldn't get that in the U.S. Yeah, you can't. You need to go home and bring me her passport. Okay. So I retrieve her passport and CDC comes, does a whole case study on her, which they wouldn't release to us. Mosquito traps set up around the neighborhood. Mysterious vans start driving by spewing clouds of stuff. My wife stays in the ICU for a week, but recovers just fine. If you look at the 2010 CDC infectious disease report, you'll see a discussion of malaria and how the XX number of cases are all related to people recently returning from the endemic areas. Except for one woman in Duval County, Florida, who received it from a cryptic vector.